program today. So first, I want to say thank you to all of you for participating so actively with all of our panelists. I think we've had some fantastic discussion here today, which is exactly what we were hoping for. So, thank you, thank you, thank you to you. I am very lucky to stand here and get to introduce our keynote. So the person, I guess, I don't know, stage right, stage left, I don't know, the one over here
Old
is
one.
Bryce Coughlin, who is senior counsel here at Fox Group Legal and in my group. He is kind of a boy genius and a trademark superstar, and was at Ballard Spar and Steptoe before I was able to steal him away very craftily and have him join us. One of the business groups that he works for is Shine, and so that's why we thought he would be the perfect person to do a sort of facilitated conversation with Ben Liebman. The one little fun fact I'll give you about Bryce Coughlin, since Lisa Martin started off the day with fun facts about everybody, is that he really is our own little reality TV star, having been in an episode of House Hunters shortly after he moved here to Los Angeles. So keep your eyes open, because if you see one about a couple who's buying a small bungalow home in Los Angeles with an avocado tree in their backyard, it's going to be Bryce's episode. So we are very lucky to have Ben Liebman here with us today. He is the CEO of Shine 360, which is part of our Shine group of companies. Shine is the group started and run by Liz Murdoch. And Ben heads up the division that does sort of all of the consumer products and all of the sort of off-media brand expansion for all of the Shine properties, which are extensive. And he comes to us today all the way from London, so we really appreciate his being with us. Before this role, he was actually managing director, I think, at Shine 360 in Australia, so he's quite a world traveler. Some of the brands that they have been building in recent years are MasterChef and The Biggest Loser. And today's story that Ben is going to talk about is really about MasterChef, which started as a small reality television show in the UK and has exploded so that it's now on air in, I think, over 35 countries, and spawned a whole line of consumer products, including cookbooks, aprons, cookware, even junior cook sets. I mean, it's just really been an amazing story. And it's one that kind of caught people by surprise because its success was pretty rapid and large in scale. And so Ben's going to talk about what kind of journey that led to. So please help me in welcoming Bryce Coughlin and Ben Liebman.
Thank you, Milan. I want to just echo your comments and thank you, Ben, for being here today all the way from London. It is not every day that a member of our legal department ends up in a director's chair on the studio lot, but I am getting used to it already, and I hope you are too. So I'm hoping that we can, just have this, make this sort of fun and exciting. It's the end of the day. You guys have been here for a long time today. But maybe we could start off by you sort of just giving us a little bit of background about yourself, about Shine, and about MasterChef.
Sure. And thank you all again. And to Bryce, when he first asked me and said, can you come into the keynote? It'll be at 4:30 at the end of the day. I said, nobody wants to hear me speak for 40 minutes at the end of the day. So let's make this more informal. So I thank you guys for that opportunity. As you heard, Shine, part of the News Corp group now, but founded by Elizabeth back in 2001 with one company in the UK, and was since grown to 26 companies in 16 territories. We consider ourselves still, despite our parentage now, part of the independent production sector. And in that sense, we consider that because we're independent of the Hollywood studio system. We sit in a world that's predominantly occupied by non-US companies, the likes of Fremantle Media, Endemol, Talpa, Zodiac. And these are companies that I guess have made their way in the format industry, and that was something that was quite unique to the US, or rather quite foreign to the US. And by formats, as was said before, you take a show like MasterChef, the UK, the US, the Australian series, it's actually broadcast in over 200 territories around the world, but there are now 38 different versions of that show. So what we'll show you in a second, we'll probably position it far differently to perhaps how you guys are familiar with it, which is obviously a summer show on Fox. But you know, there are now 38 local productions from MasterChef America, MasterChef UK, but right down to MasterChef Bangladesh, MasterChef Lebanon, etc. And Shine 360 was a division that we actually started out of the Australian business back in 2010. And it was the first time that Shine, anywhere really in the world, I mean, we had people who were responsible for commercializing our ancillary rights, but it was the first time that we created a dedicated standalone business unit. And that came actually from a lot of our experience. A lot of the people that were there for the beginning of Shine Australia were ex-Fremantle Media, and we'd cut our teeth on brands like Idol and X Factor and Got Talent and The Price is Right, these very highly commercial brands. And this was the first time that we invested in that on behalf of the properties that we had. And, you know, they included MasterChef, The Biggest Loser, The Office in the US. So for those who don't know, Shine America was the old Reveille production business. And our business is, you know, we're the commercial arm of the company. We're responsible for everything other than broadcast. So we really view the world in 4 buckets. Anything to do with advertisers and brands, whether that be sponsoring our television shows, brand integration, product placement, etc. Increasingly moving into areas like brand-funded programming, retail and consumer, so the pots, the pans, the cookbooks, etc. Really anywhere that we can find a situation for a consumer to put their hand in their pocket and money on the table to purchase something that is linked to one of our brands or one of our television shows. Live events, live experiences. So in the case of The Biggest Loser, we have fitness camps, or arguably fat camps in the US, where people are paying a couple of $1,000s to go away and lose weight, to food and wine festivals for MasterChef, pop-up restaurants, etc. And then digital. And digital, you know, as I'm sure you're all aware, as many of you have heard, is now the big battleground in terms of secondary distribution of programming, original programming, digital experiences built around the brands. I guess just before we throw to a video, as I said, when Bryce asked me to do this, I asked to see what was done last year, which I think was Harry Potter. I wish we had Harry Potter. And I wish, and I think that was the thing, was I thought to myself, well, I could come up here and I could tell you how wonderful we were and how we've built this brand into a $400 million business away from broadcast. And we had this great vision, but I'd be lying to you. And I actually thought that was what might make for an interesting panel, was to say, in many cases, we were making this up as we went along, because we were such a young business. And it was a brand that literally came out of nowhere, and we can touch upon that in a second after you've seen the video. But it really did come out of nowhere. And so we were this very young business that was trying to understand and navigate this new commercial world around ancillary rights, but at the same time with a brand that was for 15 to 16 years in one market, and then we suddenly found it on air in 35 and all the challenges that came with that. So I might, if I can, throw to a video. And that will just, I guess, set the scene for today's discussion.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's cook.
You are Australia's first Master Chef.
The Master Chef. Enough.
This is Master Chef.
Today, you will be cooking for immunity
Against Jamie Oliver.
get a good feeling, yeah. Oh, sometimes
Ma vedalo!
yeah.
The winner of MasterChef.
If I can, just, I think we have one or two slides. We'll skip the first one, but I think we've talked about this one in terms of just, you know, as I said, it's a food reality show. It's a cooking competition. It says inspiring food lovers around the world for 10 years. It is actually 20. We talk about the 10 years because they were the 10 years that we've had it. So it was actually created for the BBC actually 25 years ago. It's a fundamentally different show. It was a daytime food show. It was very, very British. And then it came off the air after about 10 years, and the BBC and Liz decided to reinvent it, and they reinvented it for a cooking market and for prime time for the BBC. And as I said, it went on for about 6 or 7 years until one of the co-CEOs of Shine Australia's his wife, saw the show, and she was obsessed by it. And he literally walked in and said, "What the hell are you watching?" And it was MasterChef. And he and his brother decided to reinvent it with a more of Australian, which is ultimately more of an American sensibility. And it went from a show that was on the air one night a week for 12 weeks in the UK to a show that's on the air in Australia 6 nights a week for 14 weeks. It was a complete roadblock. And it went into the Big Brother slot, a slot that Big Brother had held for 5 or 6 years. And I remember sitting in an auditorium about this size where the head of programming for Network 10 announced that they were replacing Big Brother with a cooking competition. You could have heard a pin drop. This was a show that was going to fail. And it literally became overnight the highest rating show in Australian television history. Second only in terms of non-sporting programming. And that's the way we see the world now. The ones in red, and in fact there's 2 more to be added, but the ones in red are where we produce local versions of the show, and the ones in orange is where one of the international versions, particularly the US, the UK, or the Australian one, is shown. We're always proud to say we're even on the air in North Korea. And then we have turned it into this commercial enterprise. In terms of cookware and publishing and live events, we ran a restaurant. We served 5,000 people over 3 weeks in Sydney last year, fully paid, fully funded by paying customers, as well as being sponsored by American Express as the major sponsor. So we're, you know, as I say, the Shine 360's remit is not a marketing remit. Clearly everything we do has a marketing benefit, but we are a commercial arm, and that's what we do. We find ways to commercialise the brand whilst always staying true to it. Some of the ratings, too small for you guys to read, other than, as I said, it's a ratings powerhouse. And probably the last one is just this one, because I think for many in the audience, clearly from the US, where it is a summer show on Fox, there's often the perception that we're eclipsed by Top Chef. And that's that bottom little panel in the bottom my left anyway, where Top Chef is averaging about 1.7 million, and MasterChef I think is, I'm blind anyway, I think around 7. So we are now the largest and the most successful food cooking competition in the US, and by far, looking at that column on my right, we're now by far the biggest in the world as well. So that's us. That's kind of setting the scene.
Yeah, no, that's super helpful. You know, the first thing that we had talked about, and this is something that we deal with together all the time, is this idea that for MasterChef, but also for many other of Shine's properties, it's really not a singular, discrete brand. What does that mean? And can you sort of talk us through what some of the differences are from market to market?
So, I mean, as I said, at its heart, MasterChef is a food cooking competition. depends on a market by market basis, but 12 contestants go in Australia it's 24, but let's say 12 contestants go in, and over the period of 10 to 12 weeks, one emerges at the end, and they're whittled down by a whole variety of cooking challenges. That's fundamentally, as it relates to the television show, what MasterChef is. But across the 38 different versions of this show internationally, there are local nuances beyond cuisine and talent and language. For example, the series length. As I said, in Australia there is 84 episodes. In France there's 12. In the UK there are 4 different versions that run every year. There's a professionals version, there's an amateur version, there's a celebrity version, there's a children's version. And that has created challenges, not only in terms of the way that we have tried to protect the brand and protect the IP, but also the way in which we've gone about trying to commercialise it. We were in with one of the big ad agencies yesterday, and in the sense that there is one Harry Potter, and the words that I said to them yesterday was, I can't sit here and say that, unlike the Olympics, every 4 years for this 3-week period, this show will be on and this is the way it will look. Is that if you looked at a matrix of if you looked at the 12 months of the year and where MasterChef sits, it's pretty much on all times of the year, but there's 38 different broadcasters, and there's 38 different versions. And, at its heart, fundamentally, one of the only things that's unique to it all is that logo, but that's kind of it. And that raises, I guess,
By the way, thank goodness that it's the same logo from my perspective.
Yes. Oh, I shouldn't tell you what's coming. No, it's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity, because we do have, and we'll talk about it a bit later on. We do have this, this overarching brand and these values that are true to it, but it also allows us to have 38 different local versions that each audience or the audiences in those markets feel that they can take ownership of, which, as I say, raises a huge amount of opportunities for us as well.
And do you ever use those differences and those different markets as opportunities to sort of experiment with the brand and see what might work in some places and what might not in others?
Yes, absolutely. So, as I said, in the UK there are 4 versions of it, and those 4 versions are now kind of being rolled out internationally, and often in a different rollout. So most of the countries, for example, start with the amateur version, which is the one that you see on Fox. But say the Philippines, they went with the kids version first, because it was more, it was more suited to where they were as a broadcast market and what the broadcaster was looking for. But we've then had spin-off versions that were created in secondary markets. For example, MasterChef Australia did a version last year called MasterChef All Stars, where they brought back previous contestants from that had never been done anywhere in the world, and is now being pushed out into other markets. So, yeah, the format continues to evolve. Variants and spin-offs are created in international markets. And as I say, that creates a challenge, but it's also an opportunity for us to try and keep this brand fresh, and prolong its life cycle in a broadcast environment.
And so, I mean, even though the brand is so multifaceted, at the same time, it really has become such a global phenomenon, despite the fact that it's being accessed by vastly different audiences. Why? What do you think it is about this property that people can connect with?
I remember when the show launched in Australia, we were actually at Fremantle Media at the time, and we had in our portfolio, we had Idol, we had Project Runway, we had X Factor, we had MasterChef, and there are a lot of similarities with those shows. It's the Jeopardy, it's the eliminations. There are some fundamental levers in reality television that are often used. I'm not saying it's formulaic in any way, but that are often used to engage an audience. So if you look at it and you think, well, those same levers are common, then what was it about MasterChef? And it is fundamentally a love of food. It's a passion for food. And we launched this show ex the UK at a really interesting time in terms of economic climate. Economies were shrinking, people's spending power was decreasing. They were spending more time at home. They were spending more time at home, they were sharing meals, they were spending more money if they couldn't go out to one of their favourite restaurants, and they'd spend a little bit more money at home cooking for themselves or cooking for their family. And it just harnessed a kind of a moment in time, which was just kind of this celebration of food. I think also it's not a nasty show. And I've been involved with nasty reality television shows, so I'm not kind of pointing the finger at any other property, but it's not a nasty show. It was about, you know, amateurs doing extraordinary things. And, you know, whereas other shows based around other talents, you know, the contestant would, you know, perform, or they would bring something forward and, you know, judges would say, this is shit, you should never have been on this show. We specifically created a format, or we tweaked a UK format to make it more positive, to make it more supportive. You know, instead of trashing the contestant, the judge would say, is this the best that you could do? And you'd let the contestant answer that themselves. And you're fundamentally doing the exact same thing. You're passing judgment, but it was just the way that it was being done. And that even captured a moment in time, which was people's lives are tough at the moment. And what they don't want to necessarily go home, certainly not in Australia and a number of our international markets, they don't want to go home and watch other people having difficult times. They're looking for something that lifts them up. And I think the other thing that just, the last part of it in terms of just why and why then, in terms of why it went from one market and commenced this massive roller coaster to now being in 38, was there was something quite humble about food and cooking. And parents, for example, I mean, this is a show that is watched by 55-year-olds as well as 5-year-olds. Mm-hmm. And I think it was just this thing of, you know, there's something humble about food, there's something humble about cooking. It's not singing and performing and dancing again, not being critical of any of those shows, we make a lot of those. But again, it just tapped into a social mindset, almost a change of what was going on.
Right. You know, one of the things that you mentioned obstacles. One of the obstacles is that the rights are very complicated for MasterChef.
Yes.
In particular, you know, Shine doesn't control all the distribution channels or merchandising rights in all the places where it airs. How, in that climate, how do you maintain a grip on the brand?
With great difficulty.
Yeah.
And I guess just as the background to that, as Bryce said, we have different rights positions. I mean, we are fundamentally the owner of the IP, but different markets see different rights positions as it relates to the production sector versus the broadcaster. You know, take the UK, it's legislated that the production sector retains ownership and representation of its rights, and so that we're able to manage it and look after that directly. There are other markets where we actually don't even have a presence. And as I said, it is a challenge. I guess we try to create a consistent view of what the values of this brand are. You know, we'll talk about, you know, when this originally started, we didn't have style guides, we didn't have branding guidelines, we didn't even have the trademark in certain categories. And I think what we realised was we had to provide a consistent framework, but then at the same time we had to let those individual territories have their own voice, to put their own spin on it. So we've perhaps not been as vigilant with it as we would have if it was, say, a Harry Potter, where, as I said, there's one version going out and it gets distributed internationally. But as I said, there have been amazing challenges, and I will get to that in a minute, but there have been amazing challenges by the fact that we don't control all those rights. Of the 38 versions of the show, we only make 5. So we license out even the production rights to third parties in markets where we don't have a presence. And that could be a broadcaster, or it could be an independent production company. And, you know, we have flying producers who drop into those territories and make sure that what they're producing is true to the brand, but it's never going to be the same as if we were owning, controlling, and managing both the production and the representation of the rights on a first-hand basis in every market.
Do you feel like you can ever use this complicated rights picture to your advantage?
No. 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 I think, you know, when Fremantle Media did it to me and did it well, they chipped me, which was, I'm a firm believer that we should be controlling and managing our rights in all categories. And that's no disrespect to our broadcast partners, but we as the creators of this brand, the producers of this brand, we are the only ones with the true investment and the true incentive to ensure its longevity across all platforms and all territories for as long as possible. in the UK, or take Australia as an example, in Australia it airs for 16 weeks. Well, then there's a huge amount of the year where it's off the air and where the broadcaster's moved on to the next show. And as a result, you watch this kind of dip in interest of the brand, and then they start the process again when the next series comes back on. Whereas Shine, as the owner, our interests are we're trying to preserve its integrity for the long term, and for 12 months of the year. So no, it's not. And I think, but it's a reality of the world. We can't control it. We don't have a production presence in Bangladesh, and nor are we going to set up a representation business. So, in some way, at times, we have to kind of take our hands off the wheel. Which I know for some people is, a complete shock, but it's just the reality. It's the reality of our situation.
One of the specific challenges in this space is, the words master chef have a meaning with respect to cooking and related products and services. When you were at the point of sort of moving beyond a television series and you started going into other product categories and a lot of product categories, how did that present challenges, that MasterChef has such a very specific meaning with respect to cookware and things?
I mean, other than the logo, it's been, as you know, in many markets and in some specific categories, it's been very difficult to register, even protect the name. Cookware is such a natural category for this brand in terms of brand exploitation and extending it off the screen. Kitchen appliances. Well, Group SEB, which is the parent company for Tefal, well, they've owned the trademark to the word MasterChef for over 12 years now. And of course, they don't have any interest in letting us use that. And there are categories around the world. For example, it could be napery in the UK. They're not all as big, for example, as cookware. But we've not been able to own the mark or get control of the mark in every category that we've wanted. And in some cases, that's meant that we've just not been able to do what we want. Mm-hmm. In some cases, we've found commercial relationships with the people who hold the mark to, I guess, jointly exploit it together. We clearly can bring the logo, we can bring everything that relates to the television show. They can bring the underlying mark. And we've found ways to work together. But, I mean, it actually creates a challenge in the sense that, and it's one of the things that, if we were creating a show like this over again, whether we would use a name like MasterChef, such a generic term as title, I'm not sure if we would. It's a blessing and a curse. It's such a wonderful brand, which is, evokes a certain imagery straight away, but at the same time, it's a common term and phrase, which, as you know, we've not been able to, control in every category, in every market in which we operate.
Right. Sort of shifting, but touching on what you're saying about what you might do differently. One of the things that we talked about a lot before when we were sort of developing this talk, and a topic that we thought would be particularly interesting for folks, is sort of talking about what sort of some of the lessons learned were, right? And what the process of building the brand from a fledgling local TV series into a global consumer products brand, how that really unfolded.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. I mean, I'll talk about the Australian experience because that's where I was when this show popped. But as I say, it went from a show that everybody thought would fail to highest rating show in Australian television history literally overnight. And we were caught flat-footed. We didn't have registrations in all the categories we needed. We didn't have branding. We didn't have style guides. We were suddenly fielding phone calls from, advertisers and product manufacturers and retailers across a whole range of categories, ringing up, wanting to enter into commercial agreements with us, but not having the materials and the assets that we needed to actually to do that. And it probably took us 6 to 9 months to catch up. And we weren't making a lot of it up as we went along. And in fact, that's now going back nearly 4 years now. In some areas, we're only now just catching up. Because in a way, without, just using branding and style guides and design, kind of packaging designs and things like that as an example, we didn't have them. We made them up as we went along. But then the train left the station. You had manufacturers who invested hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars in creating things that you couldn't just suddenly pull back from them and say, well, now use this instead. And we almost had to wait full term of contracts. We had to wait until products had sold through. We had to, we were kind of then, train leaves the station, and then we were lining up, okay, what does the future look like now? We were, as I say, we were playing catch up. And that's probably been one of the biggest fundamental learnings for us, is that as new brands that Shine has created in international markets have come about, is just having a bit more of a forward view of, and I guess for some people in the audience this may be common sense, and it was, it's just that we weren't set up to do it. Going through that process now of identifying which of the shows that we have do we feel has the potential to be international. For one, not just registering trademarks in the broadcast category, starting to think very proactively around what could a commercial roadmap, what could a brand plan look like for these properties, and trying to get the protection we need. And in many cases now, being quite ruthless and changing names of television shows before we start selling them based on what we know we can or we can't get. And that's just a maturity now. As I said, that just came from experience. And
excellent trademark advice. If I
of
do
course,
say so myself.
From the boy genius. You should be on one of our shows. But yeah, as I say, as the next shows have kind of come through the development pipeline, we have certainly learned from those mistakes.
Mm-hmm. You had mentioned earlier that Shine's young, right? Young team, young business. Do you think that allowed a certain amount of flexibility to sort of find your way with a product like this?
Yes. We are 11 years old. So there's no legacy there. There's no legacy in terms of how deals need to be done, even from a legal framework perspective. I was with somebody this morning. There's no sense of, well, a deal's always been done this way, or a contract's always been structured this way, so it has to be that way. I mean, Liz has been wonderful in creating from top down this sense of you do what's right for the brand, but be entrepreneurial and take educated risks. Clearly don't just throw caution to the wind, but take educated risks, but be bold and be adventurous, not only in terms of what we try to put on screen, but even the way that we, build these brands off screen. And so now when we sit down and, we think about some of the things that we want to do with MasterChef as it moves into the second stage of its life cycle, we are being extremely ambitious, and we're looking to completely reinvent brands and take something that, as I said, is a cooking competition, and now try and almost turn it on its head and create lifestyle brands. And hence the title of the session, which was, how do you create something that potentially outlasts a television show? And that comes from that ability to be adventurous, but also not having that legacy that says it has to be done this way and don't stray outside the lines.
So as you're developing all the new properties that you guys are developing, what are sort of the big, huge takeaways from the MasterChef experience? What do you try to replicate? What are you trying to steer away from when you're approaching new brands?
Yeah. I think for television and film, in terms of the commercial or the exploitation of those brands off screen, Shine didn't plan. There was no great plan to create these reality lifestyle entertainment properties. We just happened to fall into that space. Whereas some of our competitors had big game shows and have made enormous amounts of money in terms of developing those on screen and off, or talent-based shows, the likes of the Idols, the X Factors, etc. We found our way into this lifestyle category, which a lot of people always said you couldn't build off screen in the same way. People didn't want to engage with that because the people who bought licensed products or licensed services were generally 16-year-old kids, and you can't stick MasterChef on you're not going to stick it on children's underwear in the same way you would the Avengers, so what are you going to do with it? And it forced us to think differently. And it forced us to maybe think, actually, if we could get the formula right on screen, and we potentially, and as I say, we create scripted and comedy and reality and all those types of things, but I'll just talk within this lifestyle category, that if we thought differently and we built things that were built on what the heart of what this brand was, as opposed to just what people see on screen, that actually we had this great commercial opportunity to create things that could far outlast an American Idol off screen, and things that could reach audiences that were far broader than just that traditional 16-year-old or 8 to 16-year-old sweet spot of licensed product buyers. And so what do I look for now? I mean, I'm constantly looking for what's that next great lifestyle brand, because it allows us to go after a complete category and potentially build kind of category plays that are inspired by our brands, as opposed to just what's another way that I can repurpose something that I've seen on screen. If that makes sense.
So, another thing is that a lot of people don't realize is that Shine's really starting to do formats with respect to scripted television as well. Do you think that there will be opportunities in that space for merchandising, commercializing, or do you think it'll be more difficult?
It's funny. Look, yes and no. Scripted television has not necessarily, led to the rivers of gold in the same way of reality or, kind of high format entertainment shows. But just the very fact that, we talked about last night, a show called The Bridge, which is a Shine-owned property, comes out of the Nordics, it's going into its second series, will now be created in the US for FX. It's been created in the UK and France as co-production there. This whole idea of creating scripted formats is something that's still pretty new. Funnily enough, Reveille was one of the first companies that did it with The Office. Those types of things have not traditionally led themselves to kind of the ancillary opportunities that we focus on. It's great for home entertainment, it's great for secondary distribution via digital platforms, the Netflixes, the Hulus, etc. But given the subject matter of some of these shows, and for those that have seen The Bridge, it's extremely violent, extremely dark. It's not one, although maybe I've just come up with an idea, it's not one that it's not one that I think we'll be commercializing in the same way we have a food and entertainment show.
Right. So before, we don't want to hold people back from cocktail hour for too long, but
Hold me back.
what's next? What's next for MasterChef? What's next for Shine? What do you see as being on the horizon?
Yeah, I mean, for MasterChef, I think, again, when I think about the life cycle of the brand and how we've commercialized it, the first stage was commercializing a television show. It was a cookbook that curated the best recipes from the previous series. Or it was a live event where we took contestants from the previous series, and that's been extremely successful. What we're now moving on is that sense of actually what is at the heart of MasterChef, and can you create a food and lifestyle brand that will, as I say, outlast the television show. So, one of the things that we've often talked about is what is the opportunity for MasterChef in retail? We've had a great success in creating consumer products, but why put the brand on the consumer product when you can stick it on the store? And what would that look like? The old way of thinking would be, well, it would be a store for MasterChef merchandise. I don't want to create that business. What I want to create is the business that's, what would the best in food, the best in cooking look like? Well, it's probably some sort of a mix between Williams-Sonoma and Whole Foods. And that is there an opportunity where we say, well, that's true to what MasterChef stands for, what its core positioning is, but it's not just an extension of the television show. And they're the things that we're now completely focused around, which is, stage 2 is commercializing the brand and commercializing the category, not the television show. And we see an enormous potential around all of those four pillars that we talked about: digital, retail, live, etc. And they're the things that excite us.
Great. Well, Ben, thank you so much again for being here. It has been a pleasure.
Thank you for having me.